Hey everyone, Nathan Long here, president of Saybrook University here in beautiful, sunny Pasadena, California. Welcome to another episode of Saybrook Insights. Today's guest is Ms. Olivia Piers. Olivia is a master's student in the existential humanistic psychology specialization here at Saybrook University. Her academic and research interests revolve around a passion for elucidating the therapeutic potential that living with an awareness of the existential facticity of death and impermanence have for deepening intimacy in relationships and fostering value-based lifestyle designs. Guess what? Those are Olivia's words, not mine. And man, I was blown away by that sentence. It's just really a pleasure. And I think you're going to find when you hear this interview today, she backs up those words with real substance and a real sense of authenticity around what it means to be existentially orientated. So very, very thrilled about that. And you're going to learn about what all of this means. As I mentioned to Olivia offline, what was very exciting was to see her zest, her exuberance for this learning, and her capacity and capability to explain all of this in a very, not simple, but very clear, effective way. And we're going to find out more shortly. So let's get to it with Ms. Olivia Piers. Olivia Piers, it is so good to have you here on Saybrook Insights. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome. And I wanted to start off by having you tell us about Olivia before Saybrook. What were some of those formative experiences you've had pre-Saybrook University?
Thank you, Dr. Long. I feel so grateful to be here. In retrospect, there's actually one specific thread that has been my greatest teacher throughout my life that has brought me right to the front door of Saybrook University, which is death awareness.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So chronologically speaking, starting at quite a young age, I had several encounters with the existential facticity of the constant possibility of our mortality as embodied human beings in the world. And in this particular instance, it was during a childhood road trip, and it was immediately after an accident had happened, and there was actually that deceased people were present, and we were just driving by, and my dad, who has had a big influence on my proclivity towards existentially oriented thought throughout my life, instead of driving past as I think most parents might, he actually pulled over and stopped the car. And yeah, and he pointed towards the people who had passed, and he turned around to the back seat and looked at my brothers and I, and he said, "This is what happens when you don't drive safely."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I had this sort of existential inclination towards contemplating mortality from a young age, and throughout high school, I wrote poetry inspired by roadkill, saying unique and peculiar creative contemplations such as, "I wonder what the last experience was that this squirrel had, before it didn't know that it was about to lose its life, and what field of flowers it meandered amidst." So this experience kind of really shaped me. And then towards my undergraduate degree, I said to my dad, if you had one recommendation for a book, I'm looking for an extraordinary book here that you would recommend to me, what would it be? And he said to me, "I have one blue book in my office, and this book is for you." And lo and behold, it turned out to be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And it was his copy with his handwriting scribbled throughout the margins. And that book really spoke to me. It was my initial introduction to existential psychotherapy, and For those listening who aren't familiar, it was written by a Viennese psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, and basically he was a psychiatrist as he entered the Holocaust and the concentration camps, and so we had this unique orientation in terms of observing this unimaginably tragic human experience. And so he wrote in depth and in detail about that which distinguished those who truly tragically succumbed to delusion and naturally, based on the circumstance, didn't make it, and others who harnessed a more, how do I say it, existential sense of meaning through the tiny moments that presented themselves through the cracks of everyday life, such as the birds chirping in the morning and memories of their beloved, and the opportunity, the gift to take this next breath that was never promised, and in the imminent face of this like constant, genuine threat of death. For some people, there was this deeper mode of being in the world that this experience catalyzed within. And so when I was reading this book between classes in my undergraduate degree, it really spoke to me, and I was like, wow. Like I sort of kind of had one of those crystallizing aha moments, and I saw myself in it and in between the words in those pages. And there was a similar experience in one of my health psychology lectures describing this lady in her old age who was nearing the end of her life. And I still remember what the lecture hall looked like. And there was a quotation on the projector screen describing the mundane details of her everyday life as she was approaching the end of it. And I had this profound like aha moment, like it activated this one of those unique experiences when you look back at your life and you're like, wow, that's me. And I just really saw myself in her description of relishing in each sip of coffee that she had in the face of her impending the end of her biological life. And I remember looking around me, and it was like my peers in the lecture hall weren't having the same visceral, embodied, deeply affirming experience that I was. And I thought to myself, wow, like I can teach them how to, like, I think that there's something more here for me. And continuing on in this chronological brief attempt towards a life review in terms of what brought me to Saybrook, I found myself up late at night reading into existential psychotherapy, and I didn't really have a community of peers or like-minded people to talk about this process of discovery that I was going through. And so I did some research, and I discovered this continuing education program offered by Oxford University. It was an introduction to existential psychotherapy. And so I was really motivated to follow this thread, and I wrote a creative letter of appeal to my department at the University of British Columbia, requesting that I could take this course at Oxford while still receiving credits towards my undergraduate degree. And extremely gratefully, it was approved. And so that was really a pivotal moment for me in terms of introducing me to seminal academics and key thinkers like Irving Yalom, Kirk Schneider, Heidegger in that domain of inquiry. However, it was in my own private study during that time when I came into contact with Abraham Maslow and his concept of the plateau experience that felt truly like confirmation from the universe, to put it colloquially speaking, that I needed to continue my education in pursuit of understanding the therapeutic potential of living with an awareness of death and impermanence, for deepening the way we live, and more than that, the way we relate with everyone around us in our day-to-day life, and particularly the people we love and the people closest to us that we see so often and naturally we're inclined to take for granted. So it was a combination of a calling, if you will, through connecting all these dots and turning stars into constellations in that, and the unique existential humanistic ethos that Saybrook University embodies, and how integrous it is in its inclusive commitment to embodying that the spirit of humanistic psychology, like that it's had since its origin, that I was like, this is the program for me. But however, it wasn't as straightforward of a decision to apply for graduate studies, because I've never considered myself a sort of natural academic. I've always felt more like a psychophilosophical explorer, creative visionary. Like I'm deeply impassioned by human potential and these big ideas, but when it comes down to the more empirical, research-oriented ability to communicate them I've always had resistance to this.
Internal resistance.
Yes.
Okay.
And there was one person, it was Scott Kaufman, who is the founder of the Psychology Today podcast. And he's the one person who I knew who also understood what the plateau experience was, described by Abraham Maslow. And he believed in me and he told me to do it. So I think that really matters, is having one person who believes in you and who says, you should do this.
Yeah, for sure. I have so many questions. We could go down many rabbit holes today. We don't have time, but I do want to spend a minute on before we get into your journey into Saybrook. And what a beautiful, exposition on, your first, kind of how you found yourself into existential humanistic psychology, particularly. So you said your dad had a tremendous influence on you. I know for me, it's been my mom and dad too. I think for a lot of us, our parents had influences, both good and bad, But from your perspective, how did your dad influence you? What was? Yes, you had that seminal moment with the pullover. What were some of the other things? It seems like there were more experiences that led up to this.
The first thing that comes to mind is my dad's unique aptitude towards, as he would say, sucking the marrow from the bones. So, like, living life fully. I believe that he has had many encounters with mortality himself. He was an elite mountaineer back in his glory days. He's from South Africa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so he has stories of watching friends fall to their death right beside him. And I really feel like so many of us live our lives thinking it won't happen to me, or the people that I love. And so what I'm really interested in asking is, phenomenologically speaking, in terms of human potential and our inborn capacity to experience the full spectrum of beauty and joy and presence and having direct encounters with experience. Like, what happens if we live our life with the awareness that it can, or it could, like, it could happen to me and it could happen to the people that I love. And so he's been a strong influence sort of in maybe the normalization of that awareness. And he's quite transparent and candid. And so hearing how his experiences with death have informed his way of being in the world really affected me. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it's great that your dad has had that influence. And I think, to be able to learn and hear from him those stories and to really formulate for you what it is you want to do, like going forward. It sounds like you want to have that impact with individuals as well.
Now that you say that, I think I could summarize it in terms of the words. He taught me to turn towards discomfort and to turn towards these more typically culturally avoided topics. And that's the work and research that I'm doing with Saybrook embodies that.
Yeah, that's great. You also mentioned, and I thought this was an interesting observation on your part. You were in a class, right? And you said, here you are, you're really in this moment, and you're really sucking up all of this.
I'm like
faculty member, and the case is there, and you're like, whoa, and then everyone else is sort of like checked out. They're
just getting through it.
Getting through it. Well, this is kind of a leading question, but I guess to me it seems like for many of us, and I'll put myself in that, thinking about death and impermanence is very uncomfortable. Or it can be, right? And the sense of, and maybe that particular situation wasn't resonating, but how do you reach people in your mind? How are you thinking you'll be able to reach people in that space to pull them forward to be thinking about death and also it's not just death, it's impermanence and understanding the life you have and the richness and the opportunities and living in the moment, all that. What are your thoughts there?
That's an excellent question. I think towards the second half of it, you almost answered it yourself, which is that it's not so much the catalyst is this impermanence and death awareness. However, the focus is not on the fact that, we're all going to die. It's how can I use this awareness of this truth? It's not like we're adding anything or creating something. It's just coming into a full contact with the truth of what it means to be a human in the world. And it's like, how can I use this truth to resensitize myself to the inherent gift that this moment here now with you is, and the fact that this gift is never guaranteed and was never promised. So it's how can it reinvigorate my own connection to the pulse of my experience of my life as it moves through me. And so I'm not sure exactly if that answers your question directly, but for when I look back at like, what is it that contributed to my capacity to have this deep connection to my life? It was my simultaneous ability to be present in a moment and hold an awareness of the ultimate ending of that moment. And it was like this awareness of the imminent ending of it that almost in a way allowed me to be more alive.
Yeah.
In that moment because of it.
Yeah, it's such a great way to, I think it's just a great life philosophy. I'm big into Stoic philosophy. I know that's kind of been trendy lately, but it's been something for me that has been really spoken to me for a while. And the notion of embracing impermanence helps you recognize that I might be dead in an hour or in 3 hours, but in this moment, in this experience, to really, really sap the marrow, get everything out of it that I can and make the impact that I want to have. And I think it changes the framing I think so many of us get into. And where you lead people is how are you, like you just said, like how do you really pull people into that, like thinking in the now and thinking about how do I make this life the most powerful and impactful it can be and enjoy it. I mean, there's so much beauty in the world, right?
Yes. So like in the macro, living in this way reconnects us to the bigger picture of what we want for our lives in terms of value oriented living. But at the same time, and almost more so, it reconnects us to the micro moment. And so that's sort of where I am more interested in when I think of like what is happiness, like such a big, bold, brave, brazen question. And I feel it to be having a direct encounter with experience, with the totality of the present moment. And when our thoughts and our being and like what we're saying is here now, and it's like living with this awareness just catapults us back. And this has massive therapeutic implications, particularly around how we show up in relationships and the quality of presence and the wakefulness of being that we bring to our everyday encounters with our loved ones.
Mm-hmm. Which gets to the point that you're really passionate around, is deepening those intimate relationships, right? So maybe talk a little bit more on that, and then we'll get into Saybrook in a minute. But I like hearing this. I think there's a PhD in your future for sure. So
I don't know about that. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Definitely, it's a possibility. Certainly, I'm going to be continuing to engage with this material regardless.
Good.
Yeah. So what I'm interested in this direction is something that I call the DAR method. So it stands for Death Awareness Reenchantment Method. And essentially its main operating system is calling upon this intentionality to approach each new moment, conversation, everyday mundane moment at work with the frame and mindset of, what if this was the last moment that I got to live in, and how that changes the connection that we have to our experience and the impact that we're able to make in and through that. And so pertaining to humanistic psychology, which includes these higher states of consciousness and everyday like awe, beauty, transcendence, I feel like living through the lens of this Dharm connection, Dharm cognition, which is like living with this impermanence awareness, it resensitizes us to, as I mentioned, what we usually take for granted. And in that, it makes it, I'd love to speak in a little bit about Abraham Maslow's plateau experience, because this kind of relates, but basically it allows us to see the sacred in the ordinary. So what Abraham Maslow said was, transcendence is not in elevating oneself above one's life, but the doorway to experiencing transcendence is through one's everyday life, in one's neighbors, friends, one's own backyard. And it's like this deeper mode of being in the world that is accessible to anyone existentially in any moment through their own intentional application of this method and awareness, that allows us to reconnect to this constant possibility of deeper living in everyday life and rewriting the cultural norm of waiting for Friday. Really
waiting for nothing except the moment that you're in, and really taking advantage of that and enjoying the difficulty too. Also, yes. I think we often get caught up in wanting to move past the uncomfortable experiences rather than leaning into them. And that's part of our makeup, right?
Exactly. And it allows us almost the courage to be with that discomfort, knowing that, one, this is going to end. This is not going to last forever. And two, if this were to be my last opportunity to have a human experience and to engage with discomfort, can I be more curious about this negative or uncomfortable moment that I would be previously inclined to avoid? Can I see what it's like to stay with it, to be with it, to relate with it in a different way, knowing it's going to end soon, and this might be my last opportunity or one of my last opportunities.
Yeah.
That brings me back to like one of the most sort of motivating factors for me for continuing to further elucidate the therapeutic potential of the STAR method is the impact that presence has like within our relationships. I want people to remember the power, the healing power of their presence, but also the impact that this then has on our children and the like in our relationships, our presence, the impact that has on our families and our children. I feel like it's not as common knowledge as it ought to be that children need this kind of presence for optimal growth and development just as much as they need a safe environment and food and rest. And so it's like these adverse childhood experiences, many of which come indirectly through experiences of emotional neglect, that are going to have one of the biggest impacts on the future and our future generations and the implications for mental health within that. So there's many different places to potentially take this topic. It's a big one.
It's huge. And just to sort of scoop the next lead, we'll be featuring Dr. Kirk Schneider and Tyler Gamlin in about 3 or 4 weeks on this podcast. So you'll hear that after a few episodes here from you. So you've introduced in a great way. Dr. Schneider is on faculty with Saybrook and a noted existential therapist. And Tyler is a PhD student in psychology and looking at existential. There's an existential world congress that's coming into play, I believe, in April of 25, but they'll be talking about that. So that's something I'm sure you and many others like you will be interested in what's happening there. So for sure.
Absolutely. I'm extremely grateful for Dr. Kirk Schneider's work around existential integrative therapy and seeing its purview of the phenomenological method as a confluence of artistic, scientific, and philosophical and psychological components. And also his work on the rediscovery of awe. For me, this experience of awe is one of the potential impacts of living with an awareness of death, and something that we can, I believe, call upon through our own intention and don't need to wait for, the super inspiring natural massive vista to feel. I'm also interested in the effects of interpersonal awe. And I believe there's not a lot of research that exists on the capacity for individuals to catalyze an experience of awe within us.
Well, we need to get you into a classroom at some point. I mean, like in front of a classroom, so to speak, virtually or on ground. Oh, that's great.
Well, this is one of my first times ever speaking about my academic interests and my story. So it's the beginning. So it feels like a long ways away. But again, it just echoes how grateful I am for this opportunity to speak about what I'm so enthusiastic about with you.
That's so great. So real quick, because we're coming to the end of our time here today, but tell us just briefly, how did you find Saybrook? Like, where did you, on your existential journey, was it names you heard affiliated with Saybrook? What's the genesis of that?
I believe I was researching existential humanistic, and humanistic was only introduced to me through my initial introduction to existential therapy. And in terms of what was available regarding that unique distillation and combination and synergy of existential and humanistic, Saybrook was by far the most aligned. So it was just focusing on that specialization, and Saybrook, was the most aligned. And my initial interview with Dr. Drake's faith was extremely affirming of, maybe I have a little bit of resistance to continuing education and fear of academia, but wow, like I'm so in the right place. And there's not many places where I feel the encouraged to speak freely about these bigger existential topics of love, death, and transcendence. And so I feel so at home with Saybrook every day.
That's wonderful. Well, and you said something that is a huge issue for me, is how we in higher education, we make it, I think, as a sector. And I know we shy away from the term industry, but in the sector, I think over the hundreds of years we've been around, we've done a really good job of telling students they can't, or they shouldn't, or and it's amazing to me, because some of the greatest, most brilliant thinkers have often said, wait a second, I'm going to defy the convention and go out here. And that's how you get innovation in science and psychology, in sociology and engineering, wherever. And so I think you raised such a great point. I know it was not implied, but it was a secondary point, but I think it's important. I hope more people see the edifying and open nature of higher education, especially at places like Saybrook. And I'm biased. I love Saybrook. I think it has that open space for that. And we're glad that you can explore here in your master's degree on that front.
Yeah, that reminds me, meditation and mindfulness, it was only recently that it's no longer considered spiritual or woo-woo, or a bit too on the sides of like what we're comfortable with in academia. And it literally increased 3 times in something like the last 5 years. And now meditation is commonly understood as empirically supported, and for sure going to contribute to your capacity for self-regulation and your mental well-being in your everyday life. And so as I'm just at what feels like the forefront of exploring the therapeutic potential for living with death awareness, I'm really curious about what the future holds in terms of how society will then relate to that topic, and if it will come with more of a commonly understood awareness of the potential it has to facilitate a deeper engagement with life and the people that we love within it. And I'm so grateful to Saybrook, because if it didn't have that explicit inclusivity around more qualitative research methodologies and things like autoethnographies, and that are more inclusive to encapsulating this pioneering thought and the nuance of what it means to be a human in the world that comes with more ontological, phenomenological research purviews, then I wouldn't have pursued, Saybrook. So that was a big part of that decision for me.
Hear, hear. All right. Well, awesome. Well, soon to be master peers, right? Because you're going to be graduating in a year or two. So we have 2 final questions, and these are quick takes. So it's the first thing that comes to mind, or the first things that come to mind. You have to give the gold answer. You have to give the answer that speaks to Olivia Pierce's heart, or your mind, or both. So the first is, what does the term humanistic mean to you?
For me, humanistic is all encompassing. And what I love about that is it's not just like, in the context of psychology, it's not like traditional disease or like neuroses remediation, but it's looking at, as Abraham Maslow says, the farther reaches of human nature. So love, spirituality, higher states of consciousness, creativity, growth, and it emphasizes also those beautiful aspects, which work towards preventative measures and contribute towards resilience. And so it's not just like, how can we get better, but it's how can we be the best version of ourselves, and how humanistic psychology looks at individuals in terms of not just who they are, or with a emphasis on where they came from, as more like psychodynamic perspectives would, but looks at who they're capable of becoming. And I love the expression. It's like, treat people as if they are sacred.
There you go.
Until the sacred in them remembers.
Oh, that's such a great point. Yes. What a great way to end that, in a beautiful answer. And then the last question is, what are 3 things people can do right now to improve their mental or physical well-being from your perspective?
The first thing that I would say is I want to empower self-responsibility. So remembering that you are the one creating your world. So taking responsibility for recognizing the energy that you're bringing to every aspect of your life, and understanding you're constantly having an impact on the people around you, whether you are aware of it or not, by being you are. And so recognizing that how you show up is your contribution to the collective.
That's awesome.
I would say experimenting with the DARM method and approaching the people that you know and love, your inner circle, the people that you see the most often in your everyday life. Explore approaching your interactions with them as if it could be one of the last times that you ever get to have that experience or that conversation with them, and just notice how that shifts your experience of relating with them.
Awesome. That's great.
And the last one would be to be intentional. I think that people think joy, joy just happens. But I love the quote by Maria Popova: joy is not a function of a life free of friction, but a function of focus. So being intentional.
Well, I just learned a whole ton today.
Me too.
What a pleasure. What a joy to have you on. And we're really lucky to have you at Saybrook. And I just love seeing the exuberance and enthusiasm you have for learning and for building on this knowledge that you're bringing. And I think you're going to do great things, whatever it is you decide to do, whether it's a PhD or something else. But whatever it is, we're proud and pleased to have you at Saybrook. Thank you, Olivia.
Wow. Touching. Thank you, Dr. Long. Really, really appreciate it.
All right, everyone. That was fun. Thank goodness we got Olivia on the program today. I hope you enjoyed her as much as I did. Remember the 3 major takeaways that Olivia brought to us. Remember, you are the one creating your own world. Take responsibility for the energy you're bringing to the world. How you show up is your contribution. I just love that. Number 2, experiment with the DAR method. She talked about that. Go back into the episode for review and test it out with the people you love. Really lean into that. And lastly, be intentional in all you do. And boy, this is very Saybrookian, right? Being intentional in everything. And she left us with a quote, and I think it's worth repeating. Joy is not a function of a life free of or from fiction, but a function of it. So thank you so much for being here today. We are so glad that you were able to join us today on Saybrook Insights. If you'd like to see the YouTube version, please visit our Saybrook YouTube page. And if you'd like to support the podcast, go to Apple iTunes, leave that 5-star rating and review. Subscribe, of course, so you can get the episodes as they come out. If you're on Spotify, leave that 5-star rating and make sure to follow us. You can, of course, subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, including Google, Stitcher, Pandora, and others. Remember to check our show notes for information on today's guests, including links to websites, books, and the like. For more about our university, go to www.saybrook.edu. Click on Areas of Study at the top of the page and locate the program of your choice to learn more. In Olivia's case, she went to saybrook.edu and clicked on Psychology. Or simply Google Saybrook University psychology, or Saybrook existential humanistic psychology. That's all for today, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care and be well.